Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And meant to mention last time around that, as some of you noted, we reached a milestone with the 100th episode of this series, Saving the Oakland A's. We're now in our 10th year managing this team, trying to guide them into the playoffs for the fourth time in the last 5 seasons this year. And things are going reasonably well. 32 and 24, we're second place in the AL West, but we are a game and a half up on the final wild card spot in the American League. So we would achieve our goal of reaching the playoffs if the season ended today. And the two other goals for this year, upgrading at second base and improving team stolen bases, we've actually made pretty decent progress on both of those as well. So given that we are in the final year of our contract in Oakland at this point, if things continue the way they're going, hopefully that will be a good sign that we will be getting a extension come the end of the season in late October or early November. But we still have over 100 games of pretend baseball to play between now and that point. I've gotten a lot of good feedback over the last couple of episodes, and we'll talk about that right now and try to integrate it into the beginning of this episode and what we do. Jackhammer Possessor, a longtime viewer and frequent commenter, a little disappointed with the last episode. Says wants more action, not just us summarizing the statistics. So we'll try to do less of that going forward, although my thought is that generally the first episode of the season, which is the one that we just completed that covers typically April and May, in my view, there's just not generally a lot of action in that episode. I tend to be pretty patient with my teams and use those first couple months to see how things are going before starting to make a lot of decisions. So I'll try to think if there's any ways to spice things up. I normally don't get too into the statistics in that episode. I actually did it this time in the previous episode just because we had added so many new players to the team. Thought it might be interesting to check in on the new additions, the many new additions we had this past off season, and let people know how they were doing. I know that some of you like those episodes, particularly the season summaries when we check in our team. But obviously it's not for everybody, so we'll try to find a better balance going forward. We are going to have some action very shortly, though, so hopefully that will be a positive thing. But I will note that this is going to be the episode when we do our mid-season summary, when we play another few weeks of this season. So there will be some statistics at the end of this episode while we kind of try to put together a plan for what we're going to be doing as we approach the trade deadline, trying to keep this team competitive and, as I noted, reach the playoffs for the fourth time in 5 years. But getting to some potential action, have gotten some interesting feedback over the last couple of episodes, and I think there's some decisions that we have to make on that front. When we look at our lineups, have gotten some, if I could actually bring up our lineups in the lineup page that I want to be on, which I finally am at. I've gotten some feedback from Justin Weeks that he thinks we should have a better leadoff hitter than Luis Lara against right-handed pitching. He noted that last year Lara had a brutal year with that .295 on base percentage, one of the worst years of his career. In Lara's defense as a leadoff hitter, he's a pretty interesting bat in my mind for a leadoff guy against right-handed pitching. 60 contact, also above average against righties in terms of his ability to draw some walks, decent gap power, decent speed. And we don't necessarily have a ton of guys who really fit the leadoff role well on this team. Quite honestly, in my view, Lara and Ortega are the only two. Manzardo and Keith are both kind of middle of the order guys. Bobby Cabral and Xavier Isaac are both free swinging sluggers. And then the bottom of the order, Sergio Estrada is hitting 229, Maui Ahuna 205, and Jaden Boyakai 203. So none of them look like vintage leadoff hitters for me. So I agree that Luis Lara is probably not ideal, but he has been more productive in the leadoff spot this year than last year. And other than swapping in Jake Ortega for him, to me, there's not an obvious answer to improve that on the team right now. But we also got some feedback on this lineup against right-handed pitching from Sean Gratton, and he brought up the point that he thought we had too many lefty hitters in a row in the batting order, that we were going to potentially be susceptible to teams in the middle to late innings of games bringing in left-handed specialists who could dominate the middle of our order, and thought that perhaps looking for a right-handed hitter to balance things out a little bit made sense. Boakai is our only right-handed hitter, and he's a rookie who's not off to a particularly dynamic start with his bat with a 63 WRC plus. So I don't really see moving him up towards the middle of the order to break up these lefties together. We do have three switch hitters in the lineup in Lara and Ortega and Sergio Estrada. As I noted, Lara and Ortega are kind of the best suited guys to be at the top of the order. Estrada between Isaac and Ahuna does give us a little bit of a break up there. But I think it's a fair point that after worrying this past off season, we might not have enough left-handed hitters. Trading for Kyle Manzardo and Xavier Isaac, and ultimately bringing back Colt Keith, as well as picking up Maui Ahuna as a free agent, has given us arguably a surplus of left-handed hitters at this point. And when we take a look at our team statistics, we are 28-18, playing over 600 ball against right-handed pitchers, but we're only 4-6 against left-handed pitchers. So I think the points that Sean Gratton and Justin Weeks bring up are valid. One of the things I noted in my comment to Sean Gratton that Alkshi agreed with is that I don't love Xavier Isaac. In my mind, he's kind of a poor man's version of Bobby Cabral, and we've seen that in his results so far. He's a valuable player because we did get the Rays. He came from the Rays to keep the vast majority of his contract for this year and next year when we made the trade to pick him up this past off season, where we gave up the catcher Max Kaufer, who was briefly our backup catcher. So Isaac is not entirely without value given that he's so cheap, but he's going to be 30 years old this upcoming off season. We've only got him for next year, and I'm going to start thinking to myself every time that I talk about statistics that I'm angering viewers, which is a mental block that I'm going to have to get over at this point. Thank you, Jackhammer Possessor. Now you've got me even more nervous than normal. Isaac, a 238 career hitter, decent power, but he's been a bit above average offensively over the course of his career. Certainly not a great player, and there is a little bit of value in Xavier Isaac, and we're going to have to add in other players to get something done, but in an effort to maybe do something that could break up this lefty-heavy lineup against right-handed pitching, and also potentially give us a guy who might be a little bit better top of the order type hitter, and potentially get someone who's a little better defensively. There are a couple options out there. Another thing that I mentioned, if we do move on from Isaac, at least in the comments to the last episode, was that getting Kevin Stubblefield back into the lineup against right-handed pitching would be an option if we trade Isaac away for someone who's younger and not quite ready for the majors. Stubblefield has actually not hit great this year, a little worse than a year ago thus far, but still think that he is a pretty well-balanced hitter when we look at his ratings. He's certainly better against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching, but he's not an embarrassing bat at all against right-handed pitching. And you know, he's a guy, depending on if we're able to move on from Isaac, that could slide over there and give us a little more balance in the lineup and break up the, against right-handed pitching, the 8 lefty batters that we have in a row. So we've got some options to do, and I think these are some interesting suggestions. I'll show you the 2 most interesting out there. And again, both of these options are going to take more than just Xavier Isaac to get the deal done, but it's not an extreme price to get the deal done. The number 82 prospect in baseball is a left fielder in the Guardians organization, Elliot Bonello. Looks like a pretty good contact hitter, above average already, and we think he can get a little better. And we actually think he can develop above average power, although he's almost 25 years old, so whether he'll reach that full potential is uncertain. We also only have high scouting accuracy on him at this point. A very solid defensive outfielder, an excellent corner outfielder, and a guy who could certainly play center field in a pinch. Some pretty solid personality traits. He's fragile physically. He's a guy who at this point has less than a year of service in the major leagues. He's been a below average offensive player over the course of his career, but a bit above average this year. He is, like Isaac, a left-handed hitter. I think he's going to hit for a higher average than Isaac with less power. Better defensively than Isaac, younger than Isaac. Don't love the fragility, but Bonello certainly is a guy who we could argue maybe put him up towards the top of the order in the 2-hole, maybe since Justin Weeks doesn't love Lara as the leadoff hitter. If we wanted to change things up, we could potentially move Jake Ortega into the 1-hole, put Bonello in the number 2 spot, and then drop Lara down. I don't necessarily love that because Bonello doesn't have a great eye. He also doesn't have great speed. But he is a guy who has some potential. If I'm being honest, I think at almost 25 years old, he's probably not going to reach this additional power potential that we think he has. I'm guessing once we get this scouting report back, we may figure out that his power potential is also not quite as high as we think it is right now. But there's a lot to like about him, with a really good glove, a really good personality, and a guy who's going to be making the major league minimum for the next couple years, who probably will ultimately hit for a higher average than Xavier Isaac has and will. But there's another outfield option out there that also intrigues me, and this one is actually more expensive than Bonello. It's going to take Isaac plus a couple of other assets to get him on board. And it's kind of interesting because this is a guy who's almost 28 years old and is playing in AAA. You wouldn't think that a guy with this profile would be more expensive than Bonello, but he is. He's not quite as good defensively as Bonello overall, although his range is a little bit better. Also has some positive personality traits, although he's not particularly smart. Better speed, a little bit better eye, similar contact. His home run power is only average, but he is a right-handed hitter who could potentially balance out our lineup. And even though Bonello is younger, Bonello is out of option years, whereas Cody Morton is in his last option year. So he is also a guy that we could stash in AAA for the rest of this year if we wanted to. Morton has had a couple of relatively brief stints in the majors over the past few years. Has been a well above average offensive player in that time period. And interestingly, although he's a right-handed hitter, he's been pretty inept against left-handed pitching. He's actually been better, much better against right-handed pitching over the course of his career. But if we look at his ratings, he's got pretty even splits and pretty even ratings. I guess not even splits. We've looked at his statistics, and there's a lot of variation there. But he's got even ratings, at least according to our scout, against both left-handed pitching and right-handed pitching. And with above-average contact and an above-average eye, as well as slightly above-average speed, you could argue that Morton is a guy who could potentially move towards the top of our order against right-handed and left-handed pitching. Give us a little bit more balance in that right-handed lineup with a second right-handed bat going against righties. Maybe allow us to drop Lara in the order a little bit and at least give a second right-handed bat in that lineup to maybe address the issues that Sean Grattan brought up. And I'm somehow looking at the wrong player right here. All right, I somehow clicked onto Isaac Morton, who's a starting pitcher, and I was like, I feel like I was just looking at batting ratings and batting stats, and now I'm looking at a pitcher, and I thought I was perhaps losing my mind, which is very possible, but fortunately has not happened quite yet. Anyways, back to Cody Morton. He's not a perfect solution because he's not really a middle of the order guy, so I don't think he's going to break up those four lefties we have in a row. But moving on from Isaac and bringing a Morton on board does break up the four lefties that we have in a row right now just by getting one of them off of our team. Better defensively than Isaac is, making the major league minimum for another couple seasons, including this year. As I mentioned, we've got the option to put him down in AAA, and he has been productive in the small amount of time that he's had in the majors over the last 3 seasons. The issue is that he's done that in Colorado, which you would think would probably boost his production compared to some other places. And he's almost 28 years old, so he's not really a prospect at this point. But I think that Cody Morton is potentially a direction for us to consider over Bonello. This is one of the things that, in a perfect world, I'd like to kind of put out there to the worldwide scouting department to opine on, but I'm confident that those of you who are still watching will let me know whether you think I made the right decision or the wrong decision with what I end up doing. And I am fortunate that Isaac has some value. As you can see, there's a lot of different players we can potentially get for him. Unfortunately, and I don't know why this happens sometime, I'm sure some of you could give me the answer to this. We're looking at some minor leaguers who are potentially available for him right now. But it does show up players who, you know, Alfredo Ramirez, a potentially 4.5-star prospect, who we actually can't get for him straight up. But I'll go ahead and go back to Xavier Isaac, and I'll just rerun those shops because there are a couple of things I wanted to show you on Isaac. It'll be a different profile now. I don't really know, or I think it should be a different one now. I don't know why that came up that way with all of those minor leaguers, although I had been doing a player search on a different screen for minor leaguers. But regardless, for Xavier Isaac, there are a ton of interesting players that we can get for him. I've spent some time with this list offline. And then I also did search with Xavier Isaac some prospect packages, and there was one prospect that really stuck out, at least in terms of his potential high end, that I wanted to talk about. Although it seems like with the prospect packages, sometimes those actually vary from search to search. I think the regular prospects were the same, but there was a at least optically very high-end prospect that we had been offered for Xavier Isaac, who it looks like is no longer available, which will make this much less interesting for me to talk about unless I can remember what team he was on. And unfortunately, I couldn't find the other prospect. He was a guy who was a little younger. You can see I ran another search for a prospect package, and Bonello showed up on this one just like he did on the original one that I looked at before this episode. But there was another decent prospect who's even younger than Bonello that was out there. He was ultimately less interesting to me than either Bonello or Morton, but wanted, in the interest of trying to share the full view with people to try to make the episode a little more interesting, share his details. But unfortunately, I have lost track of him at this point. So it'll come down to Bonello or Morton. And although, as I noted, the price for Morton is ultimately going to be a bit higher, and he's older, and he's not as good defensively, and he's not particularly smart. I do like the fact that he's a right-handed hitter, and he's probably, at this point, a bit better of a major league hitter than Bonello. He's also normal in terms of his injury proneness and has a little bit more speed. And I think it'll just kind of give us, although a little less home run power, it'll ultimately balance the lineup a little bit. Hopefully give us a guy who, although he has struggled over the course of his career thus far against left-handed pitching, maybe give us a little more balance against left-handed pitching, since we've been struggling a bit against them this year. You can see straight up for Morton, even Isaac does not get the deal done. Basically, only some of the top prospects or some of the key players on our team will actually get the deal done straight up. But when we do add in Mr. Isaac, you can see that opens up a bit more optionality for us to actually get this deal done. But we're still going to add in another player who would have gotten the deal done with Bonello, who's not on this list, that we don't like quite as much, who still does have a little more value, and that'll ultimately let us get the deal for Cody Morton done and complete. And when we were thinking about the deal for Bonello, Xavier Isaac, and third baseman Xavier Edwards, who's kind of a 4A type veteran for us, would get the deal done. Since the price for Morton was higher, we also have to add in center fielder Jesus Meza. He was a scouting discovery from us back our first winter with this team in 2024. A solid player, but not a major league prospect. He's been a very productive player for our winning high A team over the last few years, as you can see. like his durability, like his personality is a good influence on some of the prospects in our organization. But at 25 years old, don't really view him as much of a real prospect at all. Including him, we can also get the Rockies to keep 5% of Morton's contract to save a little bit of money for us. So we are going to say hi to say goodbye to Mr. Isaac. Hopefully this is a trade that makes sense to those who have given us feedback. I kind of noted in the comments, and Alkshy agreed with me that Isaac's not necessarily exactly what we need. Sean Gratton made the point that we've got too many lefties, and hopefully bringing Morton on board and or now being able to potentially slide Kevin Stubblefield into the lineup against right-handed pitching will give us a little more balance in that lineup. And to Justin Weeks' point, I don't know if we're going to move Lara out of the leadoff role, but if we do move Ortega into the leadoff role, I think Cody Morton could potentially be a respectable number 2 hitter to help break up that lineup a little bit, and down the line maybe let us move Lara out of the leadoff hole. I don't think I'm going to do that quite yet, but it does give us a few more options down the line. So we are going to go ahead and complete this trade. So Isaac is gone. Morton is now in the organization. And I don't know if that was the type of action that's more interesting to some viewers. Sometimes I feel like that excruciating detail, while some people appreciate it, some people just want me to get to the point and get things moving. I'll try to find a better balance going forward. Always helpful to hear what you're thinking, but there is finally some action as we've made our first trade of this 2033 season, and hopefully it's one that'll ultimately help us balance out this roster a little bit better and ultimately win more games. And we have ended up tweaking our lineup. We're going to put Stubblefield in as our designated hitter against right-handed pitching, taking the spot in the lineup held by Isaac. So that does break up the lefties a little bit with a right-handed bat there. Still not perfect in terms of the number of left-handers in a row, but to be fair, Manzardo, Keith, and Cabral are probably the 3 most fearsome middle of the order type hitters in our organization. I don't want to say the 3 best hitters because I think Jake Ortega probably has something to say on that topic. So we're not going to split those guys up in the 3, 4, and 5 spot against right-handed pitching. Morton is actually just going to become a utility outfielder for us. I thought about trying to find him a spot in the starting lineup against left-handed pitching, but honestly, if we were going to be taking him out of the lineup, it would be for Cabral or Manzardo, and both of those guys are pretty respectable against left-handed pitching. And although Luis Taveras is not having a great year for us thus far, he's only 24 years old. He's got a little more home run pop in his bat than Morton does. So we're going to keep trying to play him against left-handed pitching for the time being. If we decide that it makes more sense for Taveras down the line to potentially get more regular playing time in AAA, when we do get to our mid-season review because he's still struggling, then perhaps that could be an opportunity for Morton to get more regular playing time. But at this point, Morton's just going to be a 4th or 5th outfielder, and like our backup catcher, Adonis Guzman, he's not going to be getting regular starting time against either right-handed or left-handed pitching, but think he could be a pretty interesting for a bat for us off the bench. Does give us another guy, especially against left-handed pitching, who we can pinch hit with, and gives us some better insurance in the outfield if we do have some injuries, given that he's able to play a very good left, a pretty solid right, and a competent center field for us defensively. And with that long introduction to this episode and long decision-making process now complete, time to start moving forward in this month of June. We're probably not going to get quite all the way to the draft in this episode, but at the very least, hopefully we can sim a few more weeks and maybe get to the midway point of the season. Do that mid-year review, as I mentioned, where we'll be digging into some of the statistics and see if we can keep this team playing well over 500 baseball and positioning itself to make the playoffs. And although we moved on from Bonello, we did get our scouting report back, and with very high scouting accuracy, he's actually a little better than I expected. As I noted not that long ago, I thought his power might not be quite as high in terms of the potential as we previously thought it was, but he still maintains the 60 power potential, and his actual home run power right now is a 50. So he's still an interesting guy to me. I do like the fact that he's younger than Isaac. I don't know that we need him right now, and as I talked about, I don't love that he's also out of option years, even though he's a pretty solid player. He's basically been league average offensively this year, and in a perfect world, he's a guy that I'd, if we had him, love to stash in AAA. I just don't know if there's a deal for him that makes sense for us. We are a team that's trying to win now, and as we talked about, straight up for him, it's some of the better prospects in our organization or some pretty important major leaguers, and I could see us making another run at him this upcoming off season, particularly because we will have likely more of a need for another left-handed bat at this point, because Manzardo presumably is going to be one and done with us in this final year of his contract. I don't think we're going to be able to afford to bring him back. So we may not have seen the last of Elliot Bonello, but I tend to think if we do make a play for him, it's more likely to happen this upcoming off season than over the next 2 months till we get to the trade deadline this year. But never say never. And although we won the first day of the month against Baltimore, I've lost 2 in a row with the Yankees, and some pretty negative news. Andrew Nardi, who had done such a good job for us as a closer this year, partially torn UCL, undergoing Tommy John surgery. He is going to miss 6 months. This is a guy that we picked up a year and a half ago in a trade with Cleveland. They retained most of his contract. So he was a very cost-effective guy for us. Did a much better job as our closer this year than he did a year ago. Unfortunately, his Oakland career is almost certainly over at this point, and we'll be looking to find a replacement for Mr. Nardi. And fortunately, we didn't have to look too far for a left-handed reliever. You may remember Chris Carl started the year injured. He had been doing a rehab assignment in AAA, was not particularly effective there this year with a 4.82 ERA, but the 23-year-old Carl, who was an 11th round draft pick in 2027, was pretty good in AAA last year before he got hurt right near the end of the season. And I don't think he really has too much to prove down there. He's a guy who throws in the mid to high 90s. Given that we've got a little bit of a youth movement going in our bullpen, figured it made sense to bring him up. Our plan was to try to perhaps move on from Alex Vesia, another lefty who's having a rough year for us at the age of 37. But with the injury that we just had. That saves Vesia for the time being, although he certainly could have his spot on the team in jeopardy with that ugly 7.84 ERA as we get closer to the trade deadline. Did move Levi Sterling, the youngster, into the closer role. And we moved RJ Cope, who's done a really nice job for us as a middle reliever, into a setup role to make move on the roster for Mr. Carl and to address the fact that we've obviously lost the left-handed closer, Mr. Nardi. One other thing that I did want to mention at the start of the episode that I have not is that Levi Sterling, we talked in the previous episode about how the fact that he would likely, as a 26-year-old with outstanding stuff, only acceptable movement and below average control, but a pretty impressive 4-pitch arsenal and 55 stamina, be the guy that we would most likely move in to be our number 5 starter if Jamie DeVore had some issues, which fortunately he hasn't at this point. But something that I've noted, and Alkshy actually talked about this in the comments to the past episode, is that with Jackson Ferris and Chase Burns most likely pitching their final year in Oakland, we're going to have some holes in the rotation to fill next year. And what we really need to find is a ace number 1 starter. I don't necessarily know that we have one of those in our organization, but Sterling is a guy who can start for us down the line, even though we put him in this closer role. And before the episode started, back to what I started talking about, we've made an offer to try to sign Sterling up for the long term, $29 million over 8 years. It's an offer that he favors. If he only is a reliever for us and a middle reliever, we're probably overpaying him a bit, but he has a profile with that stuff that he could be an interesting starter for us, and we're going to try him in this closer role right now. I don't think that Sterling is the answer for us as a number 1 ace kind of starter, but as a guy who could potentially fill in for the losses of Ferris or Burns, and the eventuality that now 34-year-old Mason Miller, who we do have a team option on for next season, could ultimately be moving on at some point over the next year and a half from the team. Locking up Sterling for relatively decent money, particularly if he ends up a starter, is something that we thought might make sense for this team. So one other little nugget out there that we have been thinking about, and hopefully in the relatively short order we'll find out whether we've locked up Sterling or not. And we did get Sterling signed. He does have the low financial ambition, which I think helped, but we'll look at the details of the contract now. And we actually had to give him more than he was asking for, which is kind of weird, you would think, for a player with low financial ambition. But between these past 2 episodes, I made a few offers to him before giving him the one that he ultimately accepted. He claimed he was going to look for $28.9 million over 8 years. So obviously we're only offering him a tiny bit over that with where we ended up with him. But I thought it was kind of interesting that the low financial ambition, at least from this one anecdotal example, doesn't necessarily mean that a player is going to sign for a lot less than what they want. It just means that what they want might be pretty reasonable. And when all is said and done, if he becomes a really good starting pitcher for us, I like the terms that we've got him at. You can see next year he'll be making $1 million. goes up over the next few years, and then as we get into some of his arbitration seasons, peaks out with a potential $5 million deal in 2040 and 2041 with a team option. So, given Sterling's stuff, I think this is potentially a really interesting contract for us that might be able to generate some excess value. Had been trying to get team options for each of the final 2 seasons in the offers that I was making to him, but it turned out I could only get it for the final season. Again, if this contract works out, though, could be really reasonable for a guy who has the stamina to be a starter and has borderline exceptional stuff with 3 well above average pitches and an average changeup. Always going to be worried that he's going to give up some home runs and walk some batters, but at the dollar amount that we've got him at, I think it's a very tradable contract if we need to trade him. And it could end up being a real nice bargain for us. And it's also nice to see a high schooler that we picked in the 3rd round of our first draft with this team back in 2024, potentially setting himself up to be a long-term member of this Oakland A's pitching staff. And after kind of a rough start to the month where we lost 3 straight games against the Yankees after that win at Baltimore, we salvaged the final game in the homestand against the Yankees and then proceeded to sweep this next week with 6 straight wins against divisional rivals, Angels, and the Astros. So as we sit here on July 13th, we are actually still 2 games out in the division as Texas remains very hot. But we've won 7 games in a row at this point, and we are now 6 games up on the wild card, the final wild card spot in the American League. So playing some really good baseball with this nice winning streak. As some of you have noted, I think most recently, Peter Hooper, it's been a very streaky season for Oakland thus far, and not much different here in the early going in the month of June. And of course, as you might expect, after I was talking about how good the team was doing with a 7-game winning streak, we proceeded to lose a series against the Mariners, win a series against Minnesota, but then lose a series against Toronto and lose a series against Minnesota again. Or actually, we lost this series against them after we won the series against them on the road. But we did, after taking the final game of the series at home against Minnesota, sweep the Red Sox at home and just win the first game of a road trip to Toronto. So 5 wins in a row to end the month of June. Make it to July 1st, and we are past the midway point of the year. Our record is 49-34, still second place, 2.5 games out in the division. A lot of competition for the wild card spot. The Chicago White Sox have been surging with 6 wins in a row. We're up 1.5 games on the final wild card spot, and because the Orioles and the Yankees are actually tied for the AL East, only one of those teams is ahead of us in the wild card standings, obviously, by just 0.5 game. And importantly, we are 7 games ahead of the Astros for the position where we wouldn't be in the playoffs. So things are going pretty well for us so far. Colt Keith, now 3rd in the league in homers, 2nd in ribbies. Luis Lara leading the league in stolen bases out of that leadoff spot that we've talked about. None of our pitchers on the leaderboards right now. Taking a quick look at the team statistics before we move into our mid-year review. 17-10 record in the month of June, so we're coming off of our best month of the year. At 49-34, we're 2 games below expectations, Pythagorean-wise. Still doing well against right-handed pitching, although our winning percentage is a little bit lower, moving on from the left-handed batter Isaac. But importantly, we have been doing better against left-handed starters over this month. Sixth in the American League in runs scored, and you can see we're generally top half of the league in just about every offensive category, except we do strike out relatively high amount of times. Pitching remains excellent, first in the league in runs allowed, and you can see we are in the top 5 in every pitching category in the American League. Also have some pretty good defense this year, so once again these A's are doing it with pitching and defense, and we've got a more than competent offensive team in the mix as well. Kyle Manzardo, who, as we noted, is a rental for us this year, had a monster month of June, hitting .343 with 9 homers and 32 ribbies, named the AL Batter of the Month. Mid-season review of goals. Mr. Fisher is happy with our team record, pleased with how Sergio Estrada's done for us at second, happy that we've improved stolen bases. So, as we were at the beginning of this episode, we're doing well in all 3 of the goals for this year. Attendance is better. Still need to do more in terms of our draft record and our fan interest. He's good with our performance towards the goals, happy with our overall performance. Obviously, we'll get the final evaluation at the end of the season, but right now feeling pretty good about how this team is performing and our opportunity to hopefully make a 4th trip to the playoffs with the A's in these past 5 years. Still have the lowest budget and lowest payroll in baseball. Haven't made any progress in fan interest since the beginning of the episode. But attendance is up pretty materially from a year ago, which has pushed our revenue up as well. So the financial situation for the A's certainly isn't rosy, but probably as good as it's ever been through the course of this playthrough. And before we finish up this episode, we will move on to the dreaded mid-year review. So there's going to be a lot of statistics talk here for those of you who aren't interested. We'll also be talking about our potential plan as we approach the trade deadline. But if the stats talk drives you nuts, might be time for you to say goodbye for the day, because that's all we're going to be doing the rest of the way. Jackson Ferris in his final year with us, 6-4 with a .386 ERA, 2 WAR on the season, having another good solid year. I don't think we're going to be able to bring him back. Looking for about $23 million a year over 6 years, given that he's going to be turning 30 this off season and he's fragile physically. We're going to need to replace him as a potential ace of our staff, but hopefully we'll figure out a way to maybe do that in the trade market this offseason. Chase Burns, who's kind of put himself into a co-ace role, 8-4 with a .375 ERA this year, only a 1.2 WAR. He is already on the wrong side of 30, and he's looking for similar money, $22 million a year over 5 years. As solid as these guys have been for us over the years and as important as they are to us now, probably the last run with both of them. Mason Miller not having quite the year that he had last year, 6-8 record, the ERA almost a run higher. Still has put up a 1.4 WAR for us. Hasn't been bad at 34 years old. He still touches triple digits. Got him next year with a team option for $5 million. He now does have 10-5 rights. Isn't interested in waiving that no trade clause, given that his number for next year is pretty reasonable. Probably not someone we're all that interested in trading anyways. And then the back end of the rotation, at least in terms of earned run averages, are our 2 best starters at this point. Jason DeCaro, who we've got signed for the medium term, 5-4 record, .336 ERA, 1.3 WAR on the season, as he bounces back from a bit of an off year from him last season. And the new addition, Jamie DeVore, 6-4 with a sub-3 ERA and a 2 WAR on the season. He's a guy who's set to go to arbitration next year, make about $4 million. I think probably a guy that we're just going to, similar to what we did with Burns and Ferris, probably let him play through his arbitration years. He's looking for an average of $15 million a year for those free agent years. At this point, as much as I like DeVore, he's fragile. His stuff is only average. He's only got a 3-pitch arsenal, although they are all 3 solid pitchers. So I think probably with DeVore, follow a similar path to what we did with Ferris and Burns and keep him around while he's under team control at the minimum and into those arbitration years. But I don't know that we'll get a long-term deal done with him. Fortunately, we do have the long-term deal done with Levi Sterling, who, as I noted, may end up in our rotation next year. 3-2 record with 3 saves. Obviously, he's only very recently moved into that closer role for us, but a 2.73 ERA on the season. Has walked a lot of batters, and he has given up 5 home runs in 29 2/3 innings. As we noted, kind of felt like the home runs and the control were going to be the potential issues for him. He's basically been a replacement level pitcher this year. Hopefully we'll get a bit more out of him going forward. Jeremy Scholl has been a high volume pitcher for us out of the bullpen, 54 innings already with a 3.33 ERA. Similar to Sterling, he's basically been replacement level when all is said and done. That 107 FIP minus is not particularly impressive. Henry Lalane, left-handed arm out of the pen, another pretty high volume reliever with 47 2/3 innings, 3.40 ERA. Nice season from the lefty Lalane. He is a guy who could certainly be in the mix to join the rotation next year. RJ Cope finally making his major league debut, 3rd-round pick as a high schooler in 2026. Has put up a 2.22 ERA for us thus far this year. Nice arm out of the bullpen. Hasn't allowed a home run at the major league level yet. Has walked 13 batters, but offsets that a bit with 30 strikeouts. Caden Dana has been really good for us out of the bullpen. He is another guy who could be in the mix to end up back in the rotation next year when we'll have a revamped rotation most likely. Love that he's an Iron Man and has been really successful for us in the bullpen this year, putting up a WAR of close to 1 and an ERA barely over 2 while striking out more than a batter per inning for us. Chris Carl hasn't been great in his first 5 games, 5.40 ERA for him. His Sierra is significantly better than that. Alex Vesia still not having a great year with a ERA of around 6.5. He is a guy that we may look to move on from as we get closer to the trade deadline. I think potentially trading away Vesia and either trying to pick up another pitcher or promoting someone from our minor league organization might make sense. Ian Outh, who we traded for last offseason, has been a more than respectable final arm out of the bullpen for us. Gone almost 2 innings per appearance as a long reliever for us, and has certainly had a respectable start to his career in Oakland. So not a lot to really change with this pitching staff. As I noted, Vesia could be a guy that we look to trade away. We could demote Carl if we are able to make multiple moves and bring on another pitcher. Clearly would love to find an ace arm that we could potentially have back next year as well, since we'll have some holes. Take a preliminary look at who's on the trading block here as far as pitchers, and we've had Miller on the block for years at this point, although we've never traded him. I think actually Miller's been on the trade block basically this entire playthrough. I also just threw Nardi on the trade block when he got turned with that partially torn UCL, not really expecting anyone's going to reach out for him since he's in the final year of that contract, but you never know. And those are kind of two of the best pitchers that are out there, quite honestly. So it doesn't look like there's any obvious true impact arm. Evan Phillips looks like he could be a pretty interesting righty out of the pen potentially. A few other guys who could help us. Joe Whitman maybe is a left-handed pitcher, although he's dealing with a finger blister right now. Not the end of the world. So there's guys who could help us, but I don't see, as we've seen in some previous seasons, an obvious big-time, huge addition to potentially consider for the pitching staff as we get closer to the trade deadline over this month of July. So I don't think we're going to have a ton to do with the pitching staff. I do tend to think there might be some more interesting things for us to talk about as far as our position players. Starting catcher, the rookie Jaden Boakai, still barely keeping the batting average over the Mendoza line, just a 60 WRC plus. Basically has been a replacement level player as his really good defense has been offset by the pretty mediocre bat. He's cost effective, but hasn't been as productive as we might have hoped. Adonis Guzman has that captain personality, also very good defensively, and he's inexplicably hit 317 for us in very limited playing time. Certainly doesn't have the batting ratings that suggest that that is sustainable at all. His BABIP of close to 400 also indicates that he's probably gotten somewhat lucky, but we'll take a 139 WRC plus and more than half a win above replacement from a guy who's only had 60 at-bats. Certainly could look to upgrade at catcher. Boakai, if we needed to, has 2 option years left, so we could easily send him down. As I mentioned, I think we've gotten very lucky with Guzman so far, so might be an option to upgrade there. Kyle Manzardo, the rental at first base, having an excellent year for us. 283 average, 17 homers, 60 ribbies, 140 WRC plus for us, giving us everything we could have hoped for 1 year rental for the middle of our lineup. Kevin Stubblefield now playing more regularly with the trade of Isaac. Struggling with the bat, hitting just 222 this year. Does have 7 homers and 185 at-bats, but only an 88 WRC plus on the year. If you remember, he also started kind of slow last season. Maybe he's just more of a second half type of player. We'll have to check in and see how our new addition, Mr. Morton, is doing. Certainly could argue to maybe give Morton some playing time over Stubblefield going forward if Stubblefield continues to struggle. Sergio Estrada has done a real nice job for us at second base. The international free agent signing from a couple off seasons ago. 262 average, 20 doubles and 10 homers and 282 at-bats. 115 WRC plus and a WAR of close to 2.5. We've talked about it in the past. His 60 range isn't necessarily what I ideally want for a middle infielder. Would prefer it be at least 5 and maybe 10 plus points higher. But he does have a great error rating, an excellent arm, and he's also pretty good at turning too. Taking a look at his fielding stats, definitely an above average defensive second baseman for us. Shortstop, kind of more average metrics, quite honestly, but we've been playing him at second, and he's holding up his end of the bargain there. Colt Keith, who we signed to that long extension this past offseason, having a nice bounce back year. The batting average of 249 is not ideal, although it is 14 points higher than a year ago. but with 23 homers and 69 ribbies midway through the year. Very productive. The WRC plus up to 134, and he's already got a higher WAR this season than he compiled all of last year. We've also been able to keep him healthy through the first half of the year, which is great. Justin LeBron, who's our second baseman against left-handed pitching, hitting 281 in just 96 at-bats, has put up a 118 WRC plus for us. He's got that captain personality, good influence in the clubhouse. I don't really see a role for him against right-handed pitching. He's got a competent-ish bat against right-handed pitching, but if you look at him against lefties, he'll definitely draw a few more walks against left-handed pitching, which is where we're playing him. He's a versatile defensive guy who can play all over the infield for us. Like having him on the team. His ARB number next year, it's $6 million. Probably prices him out of our team unless we decide that he's got an everyday role also playing against right-handed pitching. That's a decision that we'll focus on this offseason. And then the last of the infielders is our shortstop, Maui Ahuna. And the bat has unfortunately been even worse than we had feared. On the interstate, hitting just a $189 on the season, 55 WRC plus, pretty ugly. Still more than half a win above replacement thanks to his defense. The fielding statistics indicate he's certainly an above-average defensive shortstop, but the offense from Mr. Ahuna has been even weaker than what we got from Mr. Rincon over the last couple of seasons. Now, granted, Ahuna's making a lot less money per year, and we also did not make a long-term commitment to him with those team options for these next 2 years. Given that we are sitting here at 49-34, a clear playoff team midway through the season, I'm not shockingly concerned about what Ahuna's done. I'm still more than happy with the glove, but would hope that over the second half of the year, the offense can potentially get a little bit more impressive. Moving on to our outfielders, Jake Ortega, last year's Rookie of the Year, having a pretty solid sophomore season, although not performing quite at the level he did a year ago. 284 average, 22 doubles, and 7 home runs. All of those numbers are on pace to be lower than they were a year ago. He is perfect on the base paths this year, 13 for 13 stealing, and running a bit more than a year ago. He's already got as many steals as he did all of last year. 124 WRC plus and a 2.3 WAR, still very productive. Still think he's got a little bit of room to continue improving according to our scout, but the number 3 overall pick from 2029 is certainly still looking like he's going to be a big part of our future, and the fact that we've got him locked up to a pretty reasonable contract if he keeps performing at this level makes me feel good about where we are with Mr. Ortega. Luis Taveras, the young outfielder, hitting 233, 3 homers and 12 ribbies and 73 at-bats. Hasn't been great so far, but with a 108 WRC plus is at least an above-average offensive player. A guy whose roster spot this year could certainly be in jeopardy. Still has 2 option years left. He's not great defensively. Depending on what we're able to do in the trade market, Taveras could lose a spot in the lineup and on the 26-man roster, at least until September roster expansion. Mentioned that we could move Cody Morton into a Stubblefield role. Cody Morton is also a guy who could move into Taveras' spot if we decide that makes sense. Luis Lara leading the team and up there in the league with 22 steals and just 24 attempts. 257 average, 354 on base percentage, and he's been slightly above average offensive player this year, 2.1 WAR on the season. Pretty good defensive center fielder, and a guy who remains an important part of our offense. With the way he's producing right now, really don't feel that it's urgent to move him out of that leadoff spot. Cody Morton, pretty small sample size. He's 4 for 33 for us. He started just 8 games over the month that he's been with us. A -8 WRC plus, and he's been below replacement level. Definitely disappointing in terms of his production. Again, with the way the team is doing overall, I can't really get too bent out of shape because on paper he certainly looks better than a better offensive player than we've seen from him, but it seems like he's been in a slump, and playing only 8 games with us, he's probably been slumping the whole time he's been around. Last, but hopefully not least, Bobby Cabral, batting average only .221 this year. You may remember we put him into the contact program this off season, and even though that's a difficult program, he did do a little bit of improvement in terms of his BABIP. Unfortunately, his BABIP is actually lower than it was a year ago. Still striking out a lot with 129 Ks midway through the season, but does him 19 homers, 48 ribbies. Still has put up a 0.6 WAR for us, 109 WRC plus, basically right in line with what he did for us a year ago. He is a solid, respectable player signed to a pretty reasonable contract, at least for these next few years. It could get up to a point where that contract gets a little bit painful for us. Fortunately, we do potentially have the team outs. Still hope that he develops a little bit more of that home run power, but certainly with those contact and avoid strikeout ratings, Dave Kingman, Gorman Thomas, Rob Deere, Hidero Endo type batting average, home run, and strikeout numbers certainly seem reasonable to consider and potentially expect for Mr. Cabral going forward. So as I start thinking about what we might want to do position player wise over the next month, there's a lot of potential options. Given that we're playing so well, I don't feel like there's anything we have to do, but certainly an upgrade at catcher is something to consider. If there was a great shortstop, that's something to consider. Given the lack of production we've gotten from Morton and Taveras, admittedly from both of them in relatively limited playing time, as well as Mr. Stubblefield, a right-handed bat who could maybe give us a little more than one of those players in a corner outfield / DH spot, is something that could help us as well. We'll take a quick look here before we finish up at the episode with who's on the trade block position player-wise at this point. Not a huge number of 3-star or higher prospects available. Marco Luciano is a guy who's been on the trade block for much of the last couple of seasons. That 60 power with a right-handed bat is intriguing given what we need. A bit of my reticence about Mr. Luciano is just his personality. He's unmotivated, greedy, poor leader, low adaptability, not much of a work ethic, and he's also fragile physically. Does have 13 homers and 296 at-bats this year, but can't say with a 230 average and a 94 WRC plus that he's really been tearing it up for the Detroit Tigers. Ivan Herrera, we only have low scouting accuracy on. Don't really understand why for a guy who's an established major leaguer playing in our division. That's a little bit odd. We'll request a scouting report on him. He's competent defensively, a very good eye to draw some walks. I don't see him being a difference maker compared to what we currently have at catcher. One of our former players, Diane Jorge, also on the trade block. Our former catcher, Drake Baldwin, is as well. Lawrence Butler, Denzel Clark, Chase DeLauder, several familiar names that we could consider looking to add. I tend to think if we do add somebody, we might also try to look for someone who's a little bit popular to give us a little bit more of a boost in fan interest, even if it's just for the next couple of months. Wouldn't hurt to continue to have this team in a pretty reasonable financial spot to potentially get another bump to our budget next year. So there are a lot of things for us to think about as we head into the month of July and approach the trade deadline. I don't feel like we're in a desperate situation. We're certainly outperforming the media's expectations for us, although honestly, we're probably more kind of in line with my type of expectations. I mean, to be fair, I don't think I thought this was a 49-34 team, but I certainly thought this was a team that would have a winning record and a team that would ultimately be able to compete for a playoff spot. And thus far, we are certainly doing both of those things. So I don't feel like there's any glaring holes that we need to fill. Certainly more offensive production from the shortstop or catcher positions at the back end of the batting order could help. And as I talked about, a bat who could mix in with the likes of Stubblefield and even Cabral, as well as Taveras and Morton, and maybe give us a little bit higher batting average and a little more consistent on base production than we've gotten from some of those guys would be something that could help as well. So there are a lot of things for us to think about as we begin this month of July. Certainly appreciating any thoughts on what we should do in the trade market. Next time around, we'll be approaching the Major League Draft, or the first year player draft, more accurately. Typically, that's a time where I just do an episode up to that point and then kind of open things up to the Worldwide Scouting Department to share some thoughts with me. Given, however, that we're only 11 days away from the first year player draft, not sure how it'll work this season. If there's a lot of action over the next 11 days, maybe we spend some time perusing the trade market. In that case, maybe digging into the draft pool and who's going to be available to us number 21 overall when we are picking might be enough to justify an episode, but it's not inconceivable if not too much happens over this next week and a half of mythical and fictional baseball that we might just have to blow through the draft in the next episode, although I think I'd prefer to open it up to our Worldwide Scouting Department to share some thoughts with me. So we will figure that out one way or another in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.